Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Okay, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez. I've got a great guest with me today, my friend Cody Marx Bailey. Cody, thanks for being here with us today on the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, I want to let everybody know we are actually at Strike's Cigar Lounge right now in Boca Raton, Florida. If you watched or listened to episode 120 where I had Ronak Patel on, I was here as well with Ronak, although we weren't smoking cigars on the episode. I was smoking cigars on episode 123, I believe it was, with Uwe and Lynn.
Yeah. And
actually, no, that was episode 122. And then 123, I was also in their cigar lounge at Antigua Cigars with Ben Fossen of Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. So I'm sorry for those that don't want to watch me smoke cigars on camera. But for those who do enjoy a good cigar, maybe go grab a cigar right now. If you're listening to this, put it up on YouTube. You can smoke along with us as well. But I do want to thank our friends here at Strike Cigar Lounge in Boca Raton, Florida. One of the places I actually come most frequently, especially when I'm in Boca. I'm just up the road here. So a special shout out as well to one of their managers, Chris Hayes, for allowing us to record here from Strikes. And Cody's been here before, but He doesn't live in Florida. But when he's in South Florida, he's usually here with us as well.
Absolutely.
So Cody, we got a lot to talk about.
Oh boy.
I don't know. It's hard to introduce Cody because he's a man of many talents and many adventures. And so we're going to just have a nice, good smoke. We've had a lot of good conversations over cigars, so I always feel like these should be recorded at some point. So Cody's been really involved in all things crypto technology, blockchain, NFTs. We're going to get into a story of the creation of hashtags that was not created by Twitter. We might be looking at where it was created right here. Also, Cody is from the great country or republic or state of Texas,
Free state of Texas.
however you want to define it these days. But he doesn't live there. For the last few years, he's lived in Mexico City, and he's also traveled and worked all around the world. We actually met in Guatemala, thanks to the Universidad Francisco Marroquín and some of their programs. I'm actually donning one of the shirts right now from UFM. One of the things I love about UFM, and the reason why they have this logo here with the question mark, is they challenge their students to always be asking questions. And even when they find the answer, those answers usually lead to more questions. So Cody,
Sure.
What is the blockchain?
Oh boy. Is that where we're going to start? All right. So what is a blockchain? Blockchain started out as Bitcoin. It's a distributed ledger, or you can really think of a blockchain as a computer. Anytime you see the word blockchain, think computer. It's a decentralized computer, which means that it's not bound to one set of hardware. It's distributed across many, anywhere from 2 nodes being distributed, or all the way up to hundreds of thousands of nodes.
Wait, what's a node?
A node is a computer. It's an entity on a network. And we're able to sort of create this fault-tolerant computer that exists amongst all of those computers. So it's sort of a one layer up above, kind of like the internet. The internet is omnipresent throughout the world. So are these blockchains. So if one machine goes down, or half the machines go down, the network still stays up. Is
that like the cloud? How is that related?
No, the cloud is more for centralized. Or I'm sorry. Instead of you running your own hardware and having your own server closet in your building, you basically say, hey, I'm going to let AWS, Amazon or Google or one of the large providers manage the hardware for yourself. So you never see the hardware, you're never charged for the hardware, you just pay for what you use. And that's the cloud. And that came from basically how you would create these network diagrams. You'd have this, when you created this network of interconnected pieces of your system, there'd be this little cloud that you'd put up and say, well, we just have a bunch of computers in this little fuzzy area here. We don't really know where they are. We don't really care. We just know that they're there.
Okay. So the blockchain, I still, it's hard for the average person to understand what it is. So how is the blockchain impacting our lives now, and how will it be impacting our lives more in the future?
Right now, I would say that it's probably not affecting our lives very much. When you look at the general public, either in the United States or globally, some places it has more traction than others. Places where it's more needed. But let's.
So what kind of places is it more needed?
Yeah, let's break that apart, because
Yeah.
there's just like cars, there's many different types of cars. There's many different types of blockchains, and some cars are used for going fast. Some cars are used for moving people safely. Some cars are used for, deliveries. And so they're all very different types. And so I think it's important to look at that. The most popular, the most iconic is Bitcoin, which was the first. It was the first generation blockchain created in around 2010. So we've got 13 years now of Bitcoin being around. And what Bitcoin does is it looks a lot like a store of value, or a lot like digital gold. There's only 21 million coins that will ever be created. Approximately 19 million have been minted right now. And there's a slow release curve of how those last few, 2 million Bitcoin get released into the system. And there's no single person or entity. Bitcoin is not a company. Bitcoin is not a there's no IP. No one owns this. It really is a public good. And the way that is used is sort of the store of value. And so you look at places like, Venezuela or Argentina, or many different governments throughout the world, Zimbabwe. There's all across Africa, all across the developing world. You've got currency problems. You have currency problems all over the world right now, because central government.
It's just who has the worst currency
right,
problem.
Right. Yeah. Who's the?
We think there's a lot of currency problems in the United States, and then I go to Argentina, and the dollar is so strong there.
Yeah, 50% inflation year over year.
Yeah.
I mean, think about that. Half your year goes to just thwarting off what the government's doing to you. So Bitcoin has got a lot of traction there, and a lot of the currency, a lot of these blockchains that create these currencies. That have more of a store of value versus a utility. It's probably good to separate those two. So Bitcoin has got a lot of traction in places like we just talked about, Argentina being a prime example. And what that allows people to do is to get around their government's controls on sending that value back and forth. So if they want to import or export or just hold value, right? Because Bitcoin, it is volatile, but it may not be as volatile as what's going on in their own country. So really, it's a hedge against that. The fact that there's only 21 million coins that will ever be made, and that's a pretty hard number. That's going to be really hard to convince everybody that holds Bitcoin to say, hey, let's make more. It's like, if I'm holding some, I don't want to create more. So you've taken the decision making and put it in the hands of the holders, right? So if the American people were to vote on if they want the money printers in Washington to do, we'd probably vote against that. We'd say, no, I don't want to print anymore, because that devalues what I have. This is a very, very simple economic equation. And so at least you have some sort of guarantee there that you're not going to get, screwed over by a third party. That's where we're seeing it mostly, because you need that store value. You need, and gold is not very easy to come by. You can't really fractionalize it. You have to physically hold it and protect it. So like putting it in your, under your mattress isn't really a good way of doing that. But it has a lot of the same properties as gold.
Yeah. So same properties, but like you said, it's Bitcoin is not physical; it's digital.
Right.
Is there a chance that somebody could steal your digital property?
Yes, they could. Only that, but that has to do with you protecting your private key. And so all of these systems. These blockchain systems use cryptographic algorithms, these mathematical equations that have been around since the 1970s. A lot of the same, they've been modified and improved by then. But I'll put it this way: if you have a private key, so a private key is private. It's very important that you keep a private key private. That's why we call it that.
Yeah.
Then you have a matching public key that's derived from that private key. So if you were to forget your public key, or you were to lose it or whatever, as long as you had your private key, you could always generate the public key from it. That's a very important piece. Now, in order for someone to unlock your tokens or move them to a different account, you have to use the private key to sign a message to the blockchain to allow access to move those coins to somewhere else. Okay, so a private key is 256 bits. Well, that doesn't seem like, 256, that doesn't seem like a whole lot of security.
Right.
Well, 256 bits is a number larger than the number of atoms in the known universe.
Wow.
So now you're having to use computational energy to find and look at each individual, atom in the universe. Think about that. And try to guess and see if that is the right key. So it's virtually impossible. I mean, is it possible? Yes. But even with quantum computing and everything we have that we know, it's just not going to happen.
Even when AI gets really good, they're not going to figure out my key?
Yeah, even AI. The thing is that the way that you store the key, the way you protect your private key, remember, you need to, the private key is private. You don't share that with anybody. Because anybody that has that can move your coins or move your value.
Yeah.
So, if you were to write that on a piece of paper and leave it on the kitchen counter, it's not very safe. But if you were to, there's ways you can protect that key. You can even encrypt the private key with a password, so it makes it a little harder. I'm a big fan of security through obscurity by hiding that key somewhere really, really obscure where no one would ever even think to look for it.
So we talk about Bitcoin being the original cryptocurrency. By the way, I stepped into just a few days ago the Bitcoin conference that takes place in Miami. It's the largest Bitcoin conference in the world. I wish I could have stayed longer. It's like a 3 or 4 day event, but I was only there about 4 hours. But a lot of what really fascinated me the most was the entire economy surrounding Bitcoin. And I think this is maybe what you're getting into a little bit. But let's go back to Bitcoin as the first digital currency and the people who are what you might call Bitcoin maximalist.
Yeah, maxis, yeah.
Because there's all sorts of other cryptocurrencies. And what I'd like you to talk about is Bitcoin in relation to those other cryptocurrencies, the other digital currencies in a sense, and also Ethereum, and where Ethereum fits into that as well.
Sure. So Bitcoin was the first, and so naturally, any first generation technology that's new, right? So this is the first blockchain, is going to naturally be pretty simple and it's proving a point. It's going to do. It's not going to be very sophisticated or even very fast. And there's probably a lot of design mistakes that are made when designing it. Now, Bitcoin wanted to do one thing and one thing really well, and that was basically create some coins, create scarcity, and then introduce it to the public. You've got 10-minute block times, so every time transactions are moved, it takes 10 minutes for them to settle. Right? So it's not, so we're talking about 10 minutes, like that's a new block is created. So an update to the ledger is created every 10 minutes. And when I saw Bitcoin, I thought, oh, that's pretty cool, how the network works and how it's secured and the mechanics around it. But I wasn't. There's not much you can do with Bitcoin from an engineering standpoint. You can't create robust applications. You can't be very creative. It's pretty rigid, but that's great because
it's rigid, meaning it's got a singular purpose,
right?
As currency,
right? And it has very little functionality outside of that, which is great for a store of value. But if you wanted to create, say, some robust governance tools, so you can create an organization online and do voting or do, escrowing and all kinds of financial operations, Bitcoin's not the way to do it. Now, the Bitcoin maxis will say, yes, but we have these other, and yes, they are doing a good job at solving those. But Ethereum came out as a second generation blockchain, which introduced smart contracts. And a smart contract, really, the name smart contract is probably a bad name for it, for someone just getting into this. And a smart contract is basically an application that someone can publish onto the blockchain. And an application is really just a set of logic. If this happens, then do that. Else do this. And there's, that's just general, very, very simple programming. We're not doing anything large like, creating movies or processing text or doing anything near AI, but just simple things like, if you have more than 10 units of this currency, do this. If it's less, do something else. Very, very, and so Ethereum gave us the ability to create these smart contracts. Wow, that's where I got excited. I was like, okay, that's a platform I can actually start creating on. As an engineer, I wanted to do that. And Ethereum, did a really great job.
Ethereum's also a coin.
Ethereum is, yeah. And the reason why you need, so if you look at Ethereum, you have smart contracts. You're like, hey, well, it just seems like it's a knockoff of Bitcoin. Yes and no. There's Ethereum. I don't think anybody really looks at it as a store of value because that's not the way it was designed. It was designed for utility. I'll give you an example. So back in the 1970s, if we had put a small tax on email, right, just a 1 cent, you had to pay 1 cent to the network to send an email. We wouldn't have spam today.
Oh my gosh.
Right?
Yes.
So you need to have.
I want everybody to be taxed 1 cent. That's
just
the only
1 cent.
tax I want.
Yeah, because you and I at maximum send 20 emails a day.
Yeah.
Right? So it's 20 cents. You would pay 20 cents a day not to have spam. Right? So what it does is it creates an economic disincentive for people to spam the network. the disincentive. So all of these systems, all of these blockchain systems are set up with they're all incentive-based design to incentivize people to use it correctly, or de-incentivize people to spam or to abuse the network. And so when you build that into it, that's where Ethereum comes from. You've got to pay for your what's called gas. Imagine having gasoline. You got to have a little bit of incentive to pay to use the network, because the computer can only do so many transactions per second. It can only perform so much logic every 6 seconds. And so you need to be able to pay for that. So if you want to spam the network with phony transactions or just to clog the network, well, the network's going to say, "Yep, you're just going to pay us until you run out of money. We'll drain you, and everybody, we're all going to share what you're paying as you spam the network." So that's where Ethereum came along, and Ethereum proved that these things could be built, they could be secured, they could be functional and scale to some extent.
So Ethereum's, like you said, second generation technology can be, it's really more useful other than a coin, other than a currency.
Right.
It is also a currency.
Right. Yes and no.
It's a store of value.
No, it's much more like a commodity. So if I wanted to come to Strikes here and buy a cigar, I could technically pour out a little bit of oil from a barrel of oil and say, well, there's about $12 for my cigar, right? And then pour it into their jug, and now they have it. Oil has value because it has utility, right? So it actually performs a function. And that's a really important distinguishing factor between Bitcoin and Ethereum. With Ethereum, you actually use that Ether, or ETH is the call sign, for paying your gas fees. So when I use oil has value because it has utility, right? Mm-hmm. You can actually push your car down the road. You can make plastics. There's all kinds of functions. Now, if all those went away, oil wouldn't be worth anything. Like salt water is not worth anything because it doesn't have a utility, or it's so abundant that it doesn't have any value.
So today, 2023. Why, I think you believe this, but why is Bitcoin let's just say as a value, why is it better than Ethereum?
As a store of value?
Yeah, I mean, would you say that Bitcoin, if I'm an investor or just somebody that wants to put, a percentage of my wealth in other assets, including Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. If I'm looking at cryptocurrencies, and by the way, maybe before we step into that,
this is not financial advice.
This is not financial. I'm actually just a little disclaimer there. Yeah. We're not financial advisors.
Far from it.
You could talk to our friend Bob Rubin, but I don't even know if he'd get into all this. But Bitcoin, Ethereum, there are also a lot of other cryptocurrencies. I was at the Bitcoin conference, and the people at Bitcoin conferences, especially everybody on stage, they refer to Bitcoin and everything else as, excuse me for if you have kids listening, pause it right now, Bitcoin and shitcoin.
Yeah. And that's because the Bitcoin people, and I'll say this right now, the Bitcoin maxis, they're not wrong. Everything they say, they're not wrong. I just feel that they are looking at a singular set of objectives, and anything outside of those objectives they don't care about. So they of course make fun of everything else that doesn't fall in line with the store of value and the replacement of currency. But I'll say that these decentralized technologies, which is really, you've got sort of decentralized technologies, the banner for all of these types. One type of decentralized technology are blockchains, and one type of blockchain is Bitcoin. Bitcoin has somewhere between 50 and 65% dominance in the value of all cryptocurrencies. So it's the king of coin, and that's fine. But there's so many different things that we can be doing with blockchains beyond just a store of value. And so, creating these things called DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, DAO, DAOs as they're called. And DAOs that's kind of the future of where things are moving into these online organizations that can be permissioned. So in other words, it's a closed group of people. Maybe you need to have some sort of qualifier to get in, or it can be an open club that anybody can join through a tokenized membership. And so you allow for, and these are blockchains are these are truly global systems. There's no such thing as a United States only blockchain, because there's no way to we've detached location from where these internet packets come from. So you really, and there's no company behind these, so you can't say, well, only American citizens. Well, you can say that you have to do some sort of AML KYC if you were that worried about it, but then you need to know their name and their last name and their address and all that kind of stuff and their social security number and all that, which kind of defeats the point for these decentralized systems. You might as well just do a normal club if you have all that information.
Yeah, so I want to ask a few more questions in this realm, because one thing that's on a lot of people's minds when they think of Bitcoin, especially people who are paying a little bit more attention, is this huge FTX scandal that just happened.
Yeah.
And so, in some sense, I think in the broader world, when the people saw Sam Bankman-Fried, who was the head of FTX, and all the scandals that went on there, and a lot of money that was lost, a lot of people lost a lot of money, a lot of investors lost money. Can you tell us a little bit about the scandal, and then, basically, can you parse that out in terms of, did that totally defeat Bitcoin or any kind of other cryptocurrencies?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. If you know anything about the FTX story, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. There's a lot of connections to government and all that. I'd like to get away from that stuff and really focus more on the crypto side. What happened was you had a lot of people that didn't know much about blockchain, which I'd say 98% of the public probably knows very little. And
that's why we're here on the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Exactly.
Yes.
And what they did was they trusted a guy in the Bahamas to hold their money, and they trusted that.
And that was Sam.
That Sam and FTX, and they were trusting Sam to be a good steward of their money. Now, the reason why they were in the Bahamas was because we have very little crypto regulation clarity in the United States. So there's sort of a I guess I do have to get into a little bit of politics, but the United States hasn't really made it safe or easy to operate in crypto in the United States. I think the United States sees crypto as a potential threat. I think it's a much larger threat than they'll ever let on, but they are actively being hostile towards it. And by simply giving no clarity, by saying no comment, you need clarity when you're operating, especially in the financial space. You need to have clarity on what to do. Coinbase has been a really good steward. I would say Coinbase they're a public traded company. They've got all the controls. They're U.S. based. They're run.
And Coinbase is like a purse?
Coinbase is an intermediary between you and the blockchain. So if you don't feel comfortable holding your coins, you don't want to have that responsibility. It's like, that's a little too much responsibility right now. I don't feel comfortable with it. I'll use a custodian to hold my coins.
Would that be the same as like I have the wallet of Satoshi?
No, so that would be you would have the private keys yourself.
I have it myself.
Yeah, whereas with Coinbase you have a username, like use your email address to log in with a password, and you should always use two-factor authentication. Yeah. So if somebody has your email address and your password, they also have to have your phone physically to generate the code that changes every 30 seconds.
FTX was kind of an equivalent to Coinbase.
But it was offshore in the Bahamas.
And where's Coinbase?
Coinbase is based out of San Francisco or Silicon Valley, somewhere out there.
Yeah.
And they're publicly traded. I mean, which means that they now have the controls. They've got reporting, and that's a first class.
And FTX was operating
in the Bahamas,
a little more rogue.
Yeah.
Is that the best way to say it?
I mean, okay. If somebody you didn't know said, "Yeah, I live in some Caribbean island. Give me your money."
And he was spending part of his time in Hong Kong at the time too, right?
Well, what hurts the United States, or what can add any extra complexity, or of course there's a Cold War going on between the East and the West right now, to put it mildly, without naming names. But so any time you could leverage against the other person, they're going to do that. So the East is definitely poking the bear.
So it's interesting because I want to just take a step back, and I know, again, you and I are not financial advisors. I do teach some economics now and then, but I wouldn't say I am
I can spell
an expert.
economics.
Right. But to me, what's really interesting about Bitcoin, and actually I read, I think it's Michael Saylor's book, The Bitcoin Standard. Is that he co-authored that, I think? And so somebody told me to read that book to understand Bitcoin really well. And what I really like about that book is the first chapter or two. Maybe, I can't remember how many chapters, but it really helps the reader understand what is money, like where it came from.
You have to go back in order to understand and unravel the actual purpose and brilliance of Bitcoin. You can't just start in 2010 and go read the Satoshi white paper. You really have to go back to the Medici brothers in Italy, and like even going back further than that to where you had like people in the mountains trading shells because they needed something scarce, or people on the coast that were trading fossils from the mountain. You know, you had to have like geography was the big barrier to scarcity. But you have to understand, like, what does that mean? And like, why does a dollar, you know, you have to ask yourself, why do I think that if you don't believe in Bitcoin and you think it's junk, it's going to go to zero, you're anti-Bitcoin, you've got to ask yourself, well, why do you not trust this, but you trust the money printers in Washington? It's like, well, and there's a good reason for that. And I'm not saying that dollars don't have value. I'm not one of these guys that says, you know, we all need to move away from that. No, you've got the stability of the U.S. market. You've got, you know, the guns. You've got the real estate of the United States that backs that. You've got the liquidity around the world. It's the reserve currency. So yeah, even though we're experiencing what they report is 7%, it's probably closer to 10. Inflation, it's still better than anything else out there. And if you want to move massive amounts, that's not volatile. Volatility meaning you don't know when it's going to happen. At least with inflation, it's sort of a steady march. So you know, it's never going to. We're not going to get into June and all of a sudden we have 30% inflation. Like, I think we could probably agree with that.
Yeah.
We're looking at a default possibly. So
hope we don't play this back.
Yeah, I better not make that.
Yeah, we're days ahead of the possible.
Well, you never know what's going to happen. But I think, you know, looking back over the last at least 100 years, the modern economy, the dollar is probably the best place to be.
Well, what's interesting, yeah, because we're experiencing inflation in the United States and over the last year or two.
We've always experienced it, 2%.
Right.
But
right, I mean, like higher amount. But it's interesting because I just got back from Argentina about a month ago, and it's like, whoa, the dollar is really strong down here, and their currency is really crap. Right? And they have horrible monetary policy. And there's a lot of issues that go into that.
Yeah.
So
it's recognized by other people. The dollar. I mean, everybody. I mean, anywhere you go in the world, they all know what their currency is against the dollar.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know what you're you know, against the ruble or against the Turkish lira or whatever. You know, that you don't follow those kind of things.
Right. And you know, the United States has you know, we're not a perfect country. Plenty of things we can criticize here. But we do have a pretty strong, stable system, rule of law, things like this.
Right.
That really keeps a lot of these things in check. And one of the things I found, people can go back to my episode, I believe it was 121 with Fernando Pontaza. He started the first venture capital fund in Guatemala, which is really great. But one of the things he even said to me on there was, he said, even though we are based in Guatemala, and this is the first venture capital fund in Guatemala, 60% of our investments are in companies in the United States.
That's where the market is.
Right. And he said, of the remaining 40%, most of that is in Latin America, is in Mexico, because that's also seen as the next, you know, most stable economy. And then he said, then it's spread out in a couple countries here and there, including Guatemala. But he said, I got to be honest with you, I wish we could invest more in Latin America, but the rule of law is something, you know, we have fiduciary responsibility to our investors. We can't trust what's going on in a lot of these countries. So when you compare, again, we talk about a lot of the issues going on in the United States. We can complain about a lot of things, but when you compare it, it still is the strongest place, and that's what makes the dollar, you know, the strongest currency, and what everything is compared against. What I also, though, like to talk about when we talk economics is when you really you know, one of the things I like to tell my students, you know, especially when I'm teaching economics, is where did this whole currency come from? Where did currency come from to begin with, right? For most of human history, and sorry if I delve into a little economics lesson, but probably 95% of human history, we were hunters and gatherers, right? We were tribal people. It was all about surviving that day, right? It was all about going out. You had to kill what you wanted to eat, right? And you became very tribal, and there was a lot of warfare, there was a lot of violence, all these things. With that said, about only roughly 10,000 years ago, the number one innovation possibly in human history before Bitcoin was farming,
Yeah, domesticating animals and wheat. Yeah.
Yeah, and so all of a sudden when you domesticate animals, when you farm, when you grow crops, now you have land.
Abundance. Yeah,
abundance.
The earliest point of abundance where you could free people's time up to do other things.
Yeah, and then now you have a harvest period. You have things you got to protect. So let's just say, I like to just break it down very simple. Let's say I'm harvesting and I'm growing tomatoes, and you're growing apples. Let's call mine oranges and yours apples.
Apples to oranges.
And that's where the whole phrase "oranges to apples, apples to oranges" came from, right? So we're trading, and we're trying to figure out how many apples equal how many oranges.
Right.
Which maybe with two products, it could be somewhat simple.
Zero sum. Yeah.
Right. But then you get bananas, and then you get wheat, and then you get blah blah blah. Well, then what happens? Well, then you say, well, where are you gonna?
I want oranges, but you don't want apples, but you want bananas. So now I'll be right back. Let me go find someone with bananas. Okay, now we can do a three-way trade, and everybody's is
And
even.
what's really cool when you actually track civilization is this is what created a physical market. So every market you enter, like if we went to Guatemala, and we go to the central market.
Yeah.
Or whatever, and you go and there's this massive market and people are buying and selling a lot of goods. Think of that, but now think of it as we're trading. Right? And then we're doing it in a very small geographic area, but this is what created towns.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's what created cities.
Specializations.
And so now we're not tribal, we're not warfare, we're not surviving every day. We've got plenty, and we're now involved in trade. But then at some point we said, gosh, this is getting really complicated with all these different products. Let's create a currency. So then you create a hard currency,
right,
and that becomes your
intermediary. Well, the intermediary between, and everybody can base it off of that.
Right.
Now, you can't eat these coins, but you can trade them in for things that you can eat.
So you advance many thousands of years, and you have all sorts of nations developing their own currencies. I mean, even here in the United States, we had colonies before and then we were states, and each state had their own currency.
Yeah.
What's cool is when
farms had their own currency in Guatemala. There were 13 different currencies in Guatemala just based on the farm saying we'll pay in this, and then the other farms would respect that currency.
Yeah, if you come on my Fearless Journeys group trip to Guatemala, we go to UFM and we spend a half a day there. And my friend
wandering
Luis,
the halls with the history of all the different currencies. It's really cool.
Yeah, our friend Luis Figueroa, he does the best tours of UFM.
He does.
And they have we go through that hall of currency, and he shows you this coffee plantation had its own currency. This shipping company had its own currency. It's really cool.
And he's really enthusiastic about it.
He is. And you know what? It's funny. It really makes you appreciate that monetary policy and why it's so important. And so you can advance. And anyway, then we get to today, where Bitcoin is basically its own currency. And I guess if I was talking from the Bitcoin maximalist perspective or whatever, the nice thing about it is, for Bitcoin, like you said, it's a set amount.
Right.
Kind of like gold, right?
Kind of like gold. Yeah, we're finding, we're still mining gold, but it's not like tomorrow they're going to find $1 trillion worth of gold and flood the market.
And if they did, it would flood the market. The interesting thing about Bitcoin is it is a total finite amount, and it's just going to divide.
Right.
As it's doing now.
And it's important because you see 21 million coins. Well, I mean, how do you at $27,000 per coin? It's like, Cody, you can't really, unless I'm buying something for $27,000, I can't really use that coin, can I? There's 8 decimal points beyond that.
Yeah.
So 0.00001, and that's what's called a Satoshi. So the Satoshi is the smallest amount, and so you have 8 decimal points deep, not just 2 like we have in dollars with pennies, but 8 decimal points.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too deep into politics and government, but why would the U.S. government? So it seems like there's the government is really okay. Like you said, you just gave the example of it's not a set like Sam Bankman-Fried was over.
Do we really know how many dollars are out there? Like that, they keep that number from us, and there's never been a government that has been able to not hit that printer. They do it every year. I've got a friend of mine that talks about it. He says, every year Congress goes to the Fed and goes, we were only supposed to spend $2 trillion, and you know what? We sold 3. We spent 3. Can you help us out a little bit? And they do it every year. They've done it every year they've ever had the printer.
Yeah.
Because humans are incapable.
And it also fluctuates in relation to politics, right? People want to get elected, right?
Yeah.
depending on all these sorts of things.
Yeah, they reward their voters with and then they go to the printer, and the printer goes,
Right.
yeah, we'll print it up for you, and the cycle continues.
Right.
And there's a point where the people start saying, that like, how long is this going to go? We have $30 trillion in debt in the United States. Like, how long? Where does this end? And
Right.
with the U.S. withdrawing from the world,
And we have a debt ceiling, and then we just raise it every year.
yeah, and we use it as a political,
Right.
pissing match between the two parties to
So back to the crypto in relation to government. Let's say the U.S. government. Why would they want to consider regulating crypto? Or there's even been talk about creating an official government digital currency.
Right. So there's a lot going on there. So the government's power comes from its ability to tax.
Mm-hmm.
And naturally, a government's going to want to be in charge of its own currency, right? Because it gets that get out of jail free card, right? It gets to print up more money when it needs it.
Right.
I wish I had money. I wish I had the ability to go to the Fed and just say, hey, can you print me up a couple $100? I'd really appreciate that. No. And so the major banks in the United States get first access to that, and they get the fractionalized, that's where we're talking about bank runs. Remember, there was like when Silicon Valley Bank and these other banks have been.
And in some sense, it's still continuing a little bit with some. You're hearing other regional banks having issues.
Yeah, and the U.S. government's doing a damn good job at getting everybody. Hey, calm down. The banking system's fine. Don't go withdraw your money.
Yeah.
And as long as we don't withdraw our money, we can continue this system. Now, and you've seen bank runs happen before.
Right.
And then that's where you really start pissing off the people, and they start looking for this giant exit sign that says Bitcoin, because guess what? Those games aren't played there.
So, Cody, there's also this area in this space, I guess you would call it the blockchain space, of NFTs. So can you explain a little bit to our audience that may not be aware of what are NFTs and what's been your involvement in this space?
Good question. So we have what are called fungible tokens, right? And so that's a Bitcoin, that's Ether, that's most of the cryptocurrencies that you see out there. And they are fungible, which means if I have 6 Bitcoin and you have 2, and I send you 6, you now have 8, and let's say you send those 6 back, it's not like you sent me the exact same 6 that I sent you. They're fungible. Your account just says 8. It's a numbers game, right? So numbers are fungible. But if I had a car, let's say I had 5 cars. I had a Honda, I had a Mercedes, and I had a Bentley, right? And I sent you a Bentley, right? And then you send me back one of your Nissans. That's not the same thing, bro. We're not talking about cars to cars. We're talking about, I sent you a vehicle that was worth $340,000. You sent me one worth $40,000. So you have a non-fungible asset, right? And those are anything from bonds, insurance policies, right? My insurance on my property is different than yours. All these different financial instruments out there are different, right? Whereas something like oil is oil.
Right.
I mean, there's different quality or qualities of oil, but you have these different assets. So you need something that's non-fungible. You need a way to trade assets singularly that have a different price on it.
So NFT stands for
non-fungible tokens. And I was involved in the creation of the NFT standard on Ethereum. Remember, you can't really create anybody out there that's technical. I'm not going to get into inscriptions on Bitcoin, so put that aside. But the first place you could create non-fungible tokens were in these smart contracts on Ethereum. And we did that back in 2017. It was me and a group of guys that were up late one night discussing how to do this, and we basically spent about 2 months deliberating around how we're going to design these things. We released them into the public. I thought we were going to get really cool things like, well, what I think are really cool, like insurance and bonds and financial instruments.
Who knows?
Instead, we got monkey pictures. And for the last 5 years, NFTs is synonymous with monkey pictures. These are the NFTs you see online that are, people trading these JPEGs essentially. And
so maybe we have this artwork here of all these different James Bonds behind us.
Right.
And that could have a non-fungible token behind it because it's the only one.
Right. But if you make a copy of it, and this is where you get into what is an MP3 worth?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, if I can copy and paste it and send it to you in an email, it's not really worth much. The fact that you have it and I don't, maybe there's some value there. It's getting access to it.
Mm-hmm.
But so for the last 5-6 years that NFTs have been around, we've been basically trading JPEGs online. I own exactly 0 NFTs. I helped create.
And you helped create the standard.
Yeah, that's just not. I literally have zero interest in the
So actually, by the way, that's a really interesting example. MP3s.
Yeah.
Could NFTs be something that the music industry uses for?
No, so we fought these wars back in the 90s and 2000s
Yeah, remember.
with Napster,
Napster, yeah.
and then so Napster was centralized. Was Sean Fanning made Napster Inc. and it got sued because it was a centralized entity, and they could come after the head of the snake and kill the company, kill the servers. So Bram Cohen came up with this idea for BitTorrent. Remember BitTorrent back in the day?
BitToy?
No, BitTorrent.
Torrents.
Yeah. So
okay.
it was called BitTorrent is the protocol. Well, that changed the game because now there was no centralized server. These were using distributed hash tables to find each other, and basically I would request, hey, does anybody have this file based on an identifier? And I would start assembling it from all the different people, and everybody would send it to me, and then I would, so it was sort of this huge decentralized. That was one of the very first successful decentralized networks that were digital. There's been plenty of decentralized networks that are not digital that worked in the past also. Getting into tribal, how tribes work versus nation states, where you have more of a pyramid. And so you look at the way that these things function. You look at how you study them, and it's really important to study the entire catalog of decentralized principles. So not just technology, but go back 3,000 years and look at decentralized organizations, because we already learned those. Now we're just doing them digitally. We're just putting them into code, putting them on the internet, and securing them with really sophisticated math.
What do you mean by decentralized organizations?
Yeah. So typically, and especially in America, the way we're raised, you need to have a president, a vice president, a board that oversees. You have this structure that works really well because you have humans, which are fallible. Right, so humans are greedy. We're corrupted by nature. We have a lot of these tendencies to act on our own behalf, and so we wrap them in these structures that work pretty well. And with rule of law, it sort of secures those things, and now there's like a real penalty.
But if you had a dictator and you had a rule of law, the dictator can decide any day what the rule of law is.
Right. Well, and I've always said that the best form of government is a dictator, but the worst form of government is also a dictator. It just depends on who the dictator is.
Yeah, because it depends on if you want efficiency. A dictator is great.
Yeah.
But the problem is if you have the wrong kind of efficiency, like the Holocaust.
Right.
You that's bad dictator.
Yeah.
Right. So bad efficiency. So anyway, but
bad outcomes in general.
But decentralization it actually divides power against itself in some ways, but divides responsibility.
Right, and transparency. So if everybody agrees to certain rules and everybody has access to those rules and they're set and they cannot be changed, no one person has control over it. It's like, okay, now we can operate without trust. Trust. There's the first time we mentioned that word. So trust is the major. When you now that we're 40, 50 years into the internet, you can look back, right? We have some clarity, the dust has settled. We look back at the internet and say, what did the internet solve? People say, well, it solved banking, it solved e-commerce. No. It solved the communications problem. Right? The internet solved the communication. It mail, like writing letters or even fax machines, it solved all of that. The internet solved the communications problem that we had. And if you went back 50 years ago, 60 years ago, you'd say, what communication problem? Like put a piece of mail in the mailbox and it gets to the guy in 3 days. Well, we look back at that now and go, good Lord, imagine waiting 3 days for an email to come in. So if you fast forward 30 years from now and you look backwards on blockchain, what did it solve? What was the core piece that it solved? It solved the trust issue. I can now operate peer-to-peer, so directly with someone I don't know in the world, and I can trust that the rules are going to be enforced without having to involve a government, a court. I can trust the code. So in other words, on blockchain, code is law. And that's a really interesting point because now we have something that's enforced. You cannot break the rules. It's physically impossible for me to send you more Bitcoin than I own. I cannot do it.
Right.
It's not a matter of if I do it, someone's going to catch me and I'll get penalized. How do you penalize a person that's detached from the internet? Like, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then so it's the trust issue, and that living in a trustless society, which sounds weird because it sounds like you don't have any trust, but it means that you don't have to trust people. You just trust that the code works. We've gone 12 years now, 13 years now with Bitcoin, and we haven't had any trust issues. It's worked as intended since day one.
That's good.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. We'll have to see. 12 years is a small amount of time, and the span of human history. But
you got a lot of smart Russians out there that have been looking at the code for 13 years, looking for ways to break it, and it hadn't been broken yet.
That's great. Okay, so we're going to go out of the crypto space a little bit here, and we're going to talk about, we're all familiar with using hashtags. So especially on Twitter, it's everywhere now. It's every social media platform, Facebook, LinkedIn even, Instagram. You see hashtags everywhere.
On every product in the grocery store has a hashtag if you want to tweet about it.
Yeah. So, Cody, what was your involvement in the development of hashtags?
Yeah, so back in 2006, we were using Twitter. This is very early on. This is when Twitter just got started. 2006, I got online on Twitter in November of 2006. And in the spring of 2007, we started seeing the really take off. People were starting to use Twitter. The early adopters were there. We were using this platform, and it was great because I could follow my friends and we could have banter and we could talk about things. But there was a lot of noise. There's very little signal on Twitter. It's really hard.
There was or is
both. Yes. The tools have been refined and we've got better ways of screening that stuff, especially with natural language processing and heuristics and stuff. But what happens is like the first use case of hashtags was in San Diego. A friend of mine, Nate Ritter, was doing some voluntary work on Twitter, basically coordinating responses with the San Diego fires. There were these, California catches on fire every year. And they had these different neighborhoods that were having problems, and there's fires over here. Well, with 911, you've got only so many calls they can receive. It's basically for everyday usage. But when you have an emergency that happens, the lines get clogged, there's not enough workers, they aren't staffed for that, right? So it's kind of an insurance play in some ways. But if I use the word fire on Twitter, right? So if you wanted to find out what's going on with the fires in San Diego, because you live there and you're concerned about your home in the hills, if you just searched Twitter for fire, you'd get all kinds of stuff. I was fired today. The Chicago Fire, which was a soccer team, I believe. And you get the word fire all over the place. I'm going to start a fire for barbecue tonight. Oh, the fire went out. I'm fired up about something.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to tease through that. So that community decided to start, it was organic. This was not directed. This is a decentralized platform. The users are. And they came together and said, we're going to use the hashtag with a pound sign and put SD fire. So pound SD fire. Okay, now if you search for that on Twitter, you find everybody talking about that topic. Whether I know you or not, if your tweets are public, I can now find out information about that.
Yeah.
And I know the topic. I don't tweet much anymore, but I might be tweeting about Mexican food, about basketball, about my Texas Longhorns, and certain. You don't care about that. You just care about the one subject that I do tweet about. So hashtags allow us to sort of tease through all that information and pluck those out. These were used, and hashtags were actually used in other forms and other places, like on IRC, which is Internet Relay Chat, an old chat system that's still around today, but really pioneered in the 80s. We just borrowed that and applied it to the same system. It really, like, to the outside, everybody's like, whoa, holy crap, you created it. You were the guys who created hashtags? Yeah, kind of, but it was sort of I just borrowed a previous idea and applied it to a new platform.
So what's interesting is I was one of those guys that when I first met you and I heard you were part of the creation of hashtags, and I'm like, that's so cool because it's something everybody uses. And here's the guy right here, right? So I have a few questions about that, because one of the things that as we were talking was the hashtag is the pound sign. And actually what's funny, Cody, is when hashtags were first being used, a lot of times, and even myself included, I think you might even hear people say pound sign SD fire, right? Instead of actually, now we don't say pound sign, right? Because everybody's accustomed to saying hashtag.
Octothorpe is the actual technical name of that symbol.
But you were telling me that, tell me a little bit about coding and I guess computers, because I'm not in that computer language arena, and there's so many computer languages. But you said that, we chose the pound sign, but we could have chosen a lot of other symbols. So tell me why the
dollar sign was already used for currencies, or now we use it to denote on Twitter. You have what are called stock symbols, and you'll see the dollar sign, MSFT for Microsoft, and that way you can click on it and follow that ticker sign. Yeah. And that way it's married to a dictionary that's in the stock market makes it a little easier. If you're talking about Microsoft itself, you might use pound MSFT.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about the actual stock, because you don't care about the company, you just care about the stock, you use a $sign. Well, the period doesn't make sense because we use that at the end of sentences. Sometimes we forget to put spaces. So you need to think about all these different use cases.
Yeah. @ was already used.
@ is used for denoting a user, which is pretty much common across all platforms. And you need something on the keyboard that's kind of easy to get to, right? We could have picked some obscure symbol that, to use that would have been cute, but like, how do you actually hold down the shift key? And you need a button up there on the numbers to hit. And ampersand, probably not the right one. So hashtag, the £, Octothorpe was the one we went with, and it was used prior in other areas.
So it's interesting because if I didn't know this story, I would have probably just thought Twitter created hashtags, because that's kind of when they first started coming about, was through Twitter, even though it's used on a lot of platforms now.
Yeah.
So you actually approached Twitter, went to Twitter headquarters. Tell me about what you brought to them, what their response was.
That was March of 2007.
2 years before I got on Twitter.
Yeah. I went to Twitter was just they were still having they were having scaling issues because this was a new way of addressing data in a very large sense. And so Twitter had a really hard problem getting their systems to just keep up with the demand. And I think they had maybe 30 or 40 employees. They had a really kind of a dingy looking workspace over in South Park, San Francisco. And I walked in the door and said, can I meet with some guys? I've got some technology around Twitter. This is literally just walking in off the street, because
knocking on the door.
Yeah. And came in and talked to Jack Dorsey and Biz Stone at a table, and it was like
you could actually just walk into Twitter and talk to Jack Dorsey.
Yeah, this was. They had already made their money with Blogger.com or Blogspot or one of those things. This was their second venture, and they were still approachable. The community was so small, and so I walked in, this kid from Texas with no real, I'm not a Stanford researcher. I'm not one of the ilk that come from that area. And I sat down with him. I said, look, these hashtags are pretty interesting. I wrote an indexer. My team's written an indexer to track these hashtags. And we think they're going to be useful in the future. We've already seen them used in San Diego. We think this is pretty big. We'd like to work with you, or, how do we collaborate? I'm a real collaborative person. I'm not.
Yeah.
And they said, oh, that's stupid. No one's ever going to use that. Who's going to put a £, in front of a word? All right, here we are, about 3 years later, they're on every freaking, shoe box, and every commercial on TV is the £. So I'm like, I've got a little bit of animosity towards Twitter for that, because I'm like, dude, I was at your doorstep trying to tell you, like, this is going to work, but you sloughed me off because I.
So has anybody made money off hashtags? Is it just an idea?
So I always get that all the time. Oh wow, you must have a huge exit. No, it's like creating a new word.
Right.
So you create a new word. You come up with a new term. Like I'm talking about like an English word, a term for a new concept. How do you monetize that? I guess you could, because you were one of the creators, you can go on some giant speaking gig and talk to social media experts. No, thank you. And so I basically just said, okay, well, that was cool. That was a public good. It was innovation, and I gave it away. And if I tried to capture, how would I? I'm asking you, how would I have monetized that? I looked at all different ways. I made, I made an indexer and I sold it back in the day, but that wasn't anybody could have done that. So there was no real secret sauce there. So
you were just there sharing that this is a way for people to do it. It's already kind of built into the code of tweets or anything.
Language. It's just this is language. So it's cool, but how would
Twitter didn't need, or any of these platforms, they didn't need
permission
to do something to make the hashtag thing work. That the hashtag worked without Twitter.
Right. And then they made it where you can. Once they said, "Oh, it is actually working," they made it where you can click on the hashtag and then get all the tweets.
That's where I think you could have made money, right? If you would, I don't know. I have no idea if you could have. But if you were the guy that, let's say you were working for Twitter,
right?
And you were the employee that raised your hand and said, "Hey, I got a cool concept here."
Yeah.
Oh, great! Wow. You know what,
yeah,
Cody? But when that's great. We're going to give you a promotion. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
Now I'm getting a promotion at Twitter. Good Lord, that's not what I want. So, so it was interesting. It was a stripe.
So what was Jack Dorsey like?
What do you think he was like? There's no way that some 25-year-old kid from Texas is going to come in here and tell me how to run my business. Okay, dude. All right.
Well, anyway, so Cody, something else kind of interesting. We're all familiar with TED Talks, and maybe you want to explain to the audience who's not, but I think most people are familiar with TED Talks now.
Yeah.
Which I remember when TED Talks first came around, they were really cool, and I probably still share some of them now and then. One of
Less
my
and
favorites,
less more.
one of my favorites is Simon Sinek, who
Yeah.
gave the famous Start With Why, and I guess his TED Talk was so successful they said you should write a book, which is kind of funny. I think his book is great. I've used it in the Fearless Journeys Community Book Club. But it's funny, one thing I've gotten out of myself reading his book, and also I think other people have made a mention, is you feel like probably just read the first 20-30% of that book, and then it seems like he just has to add...
The publisher said it needs to be a little thicker than
Yeah,
a pamphlet.
yeah. Whereas the TED Talk was just phenomenal in 20 minutes or less or whatever. So tell us about you were also captivated by TED Talks, and...
What did I do with that?
What was your response to TED Talks?
Yeah, so I was 20. This is around the same time as hashtags, actually. It was like the same year. I had this like year where like two things took off. I was up late one night at my co-working space in 2007, 2006.
Were you still in Texas?
Yeah. I lived in Texas until 2013. I was in Bryan College Station, a little college town.
Did you go to Texas A&M?
I never went to college.
You never went to college?
No.
Not at all, not one class?
No, but I read all the same books. I just didn't pay to take the test.
You were like Goodwill Hunting.
Yeah, I guess.
You weren't the janitor, though.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, okay. TED Talks.
So I'm up late one night watching these TED Talks, blowing my mind. Because back when they first came out, it was like some really cool stuff. And I don't think I've watched a TED Talk in the last 5 years, to be honest. But there was some really, really great... And the TED organization actually started in 1984.
Wow.
Most people don't realize that. And it was this group of intellectuals that would get together in Monterey, California, and do these things. And over time, it grew and grew and grew. And then in 2005-ish, they started publishing their TED Talks online on YouTube, so people can go and see these ideas worth spreading. It's the tagline for TED. So I was up late one night, blowing my mind. Wow, there's really interesting concepts and ideas. And I thought, well, this seems like a conference for me. Like, I should go to the TED conference, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, you look like you have ideas worth spreading.
Right, yeah, and there's plenty of them out there. And so I was like, yeah, okay. So I go to the TED.com website. I see that it's coming up in February. I'm like, oh, cool, like it's in 2 months. That's perfect timing, like serendipitously. Maybe I should buy a ticket, so there's nowhere to buy tickets on the TED.com website. So for an organization that is so well put together and so polished, they make it really hard to buy tickets to their event. Like, just give me a sold out if it's sold out. Why are you hiding it? And then I realized that there's 3 qualifiers. You have to be invited. It's limited to 1,000 people, and it's $6,000 to attend. Well, Cody, living in a college town with hashtags that wasn't making any money, didn't have $6,000 to blow on a conference. But I have a history of getting into places I shouldn't be, and so I thought, well, I'll just show up. What are they going to do, right? I can, as a young kid showing up to maybe I can help out. Hey, y'all need some help? I'll volunteer over here or whatever. I'll just sneak in or something. If you're not going to do that if you're far away. You got to be at the event to actually sneak in. So that was my plan. I bought a ticket to Northern California, and I was going to go and crash the TED conference. And so woke up the next morning. My roommate says, what's going on, man? And I said, I'm going to the TED. You're going to the TED con? How are you? Did you get invited? I said, no, I'm just going to show up. And he's like, yeah, of course, that's what you do. Well, I want to go. I was like, well, come on, man, it'd be fun. Like, let's you and I go out there. So he bought a ticket. We were going to stay at a friend's house. And,
plane ticket.
Yeah. And we were going to buy so I called my friend in San Francisco and said, hey, can we crash with you for a couple of nights? It'd be good to see you. Yeah, come on over. What are y'all doing? Well, we're going out to Monterey for the TED. I want to go to the TED conference. All right, 3, let's go. 3 turned into 5, turned into 8, turned into 13, turned into 20, turned into 40. Once we had 40 people, I was like, oh, crap. Like, my idea of sneaking into the TED conference isn't going to happen. 40 people can't do anything incognito.
That's good for 1 or 2 people.
Right. But it just sort of got away from me, and it was just an idea. It was kind of a bad idea. And so we were like, well, crap, what are we going to do? It's like, well, guys, we can't sneak into the conference now, but maybe we can just hang out in the hotel lobbies and the restaurants and the bars at night when they're out of the conference. Monterey's a small town. There's 1,000 thought leaders. Might be a good place to network. And then we said, well, what are we going to do during the day? Like, while they're all locked up in their ivory tower, I guess we can go to the museum or, cruise down the PCH or whatever. But hey, actually, you know what? We've got a bunch of people coming in, of these 40 people. We've got some really interesting people that are doing innovation work and technology and science and biology and even space and all these different places. Space meaning like the early guys in SpaceX and that kind of thing. And so we said,
was Elon there?
Elon, I don't think Elon ever showed up, but I know a lot of his guys did, and we had the PayPal Mafia was involved early. PayPal Mafia are the 6 or 7 guys that were early into
Peter Thiel.
Those guys were definitely sympathized. They liked what we were doing, and we had kind of a connection with that group unofficially. There was never any sort of, there's no paperwork, there's no contracts. This is all handshake and people knowing each other. So building a tight trust network. And so we thought, well, we've got all these really smart people showing up that are interested in TED. Well, why don't we do our own conference during the day? So while the TED conference is going on and all these 1,000 thought leaders that paid money and were invited are locked up in their ivory tower, we'll do something out here, and we'll do it sort of egalitarian. We'll do it for free, but we need a name. God, we need a name for it. Well, what are we going to name it? Well, I mean, this is kind of a goofy idea to begin with. We're not really taking ourselves too seriously. They're named TED. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So we'll be Bill, they'll be Ted. They're red, we're blue, right? So we made this whole thing, and now
it's BIL.
BIL. TED is 3 letters. We're 3 letters, and so we're the BIL Conference, unconference. Which unconferences are a whole. You should read about that if you're interested. They're the sort of organic creation of a conference without any structure.
Yeah, and just an aside here, because conferences you tend to have speakers and a lot of structure.
Broadcasting from one person, yeah.
That's a great way to say it. Broadcasting from one person. What's great, almost every conference I've ever been at, the best part about the conference isn't the speakers, it's the networking.
Right.
And you and I have both been to Antigua Forum by UFM down in Guatemala, and they call the entire thing a constant coffee break.
Yeah.
Where you can flow anywhere you want. It's not a speaker speaking at you. It's everybody in conversation with one another.
Yeah, the real value of a conference is in the halls, not in the actual room. You might want to go see one person talk about a certain subject, but that's more of a break from the actual network.
Even when I was at the Bitcoin conference the other day, I did go to 2 speakers because I was like, oh, that's it. I want to see what this person has to say. But 90% of my time was spent in the exhibit hall, talking to people, walking around, being introduced. Yeah.
I mean, because all the talks are broadcasted online. So if you really just wanted to see what these certain, you could just go online and watch it.
Right. And so it's not like these people have only spoken there.
Right.
They speak everywhere.
Yeah, so TED's going on. We're doing our thing across the street called BIL, and now that we have a flag planted, we used a wiki, which is anybody can access a wiki to update it. And the whole conference got organized online, and Wired magazine picked us up, the Wall Street Journal picked us up, NPR picked us up, and so now we had a problem.
Yeah,
we were getting too big.
Too much attention. And I'm like, well, we don't really, this was a bad idea. The conference is happening in 6 weeks. What are we going to do? So, of course, TED heard about this because it's national news now in 2006, 2007, December, January. And we got an email from TED's lawyers, cease and desist, because they were pissed off that, and let me be clear. We were not anti-TED. If any of the you wanted to go to TED.
Yeah, so people that go to TED are called TEDsters, and people who go to BIL are called builders. TED is for the people who have changed the world, and BIL is for the people who want to change the world. There's typically there's a very large age. Just the average age of the builder is much lower than the average age of the TEDster, and so we were just filling a gap in the ecosystem that TED had created, and so we got this cease and desist, and I'm like, crap. What are we going to do? I don't have any money. They probably have really good lawyers, and I don't really know what I'm doing. This is a bad idea turned worse.
You're in your mid-20s.
I have no idea what I'm doing. And so we sit on the email for a little while, and then there's the Barbra Streisand effect, which is basically really short. It's basically when you do something and it backfires on you. If you go read the Barbra Streisand effect, you want to know the whole background behind that. Well, we sent the URL for the Barbra Streisand effect back to the lawyers.
Wait, hold on. Barbra Streisand effect basically was there were some people doing some tours of Hollywood homes, or right?
Helicopter tours. Paparazzi photographer taking photos of the lifestyles of the rich and famous in Malibu.
And she tried to sue them?
Right, for invasion of privacy, which, if I'm peeking over my neighbor's fence, it's not illegal, but it's frowned upon. It's not morally right, but legally, the paparazzi photographer had every right to fly a helicopter along the cliffs of Malibu and take photos. Mm-hmm. But when she sued him, then everybody online went, wait a minute, what is she trying to hide? And so everybody went to go look at the photos. It blew up in her face. So
the reverse effect of what she wanted to
right.
happen. Yes.
So we sent them that thing we sent the link to the Barbra Streisand Effect Wikipedia article. Just hit reply to the author, sent that over, never heard from him again. Basically saying, come at me, bro. Like, really, if you want to sue us, you're only going to make us stronger, and the public sentiment will be on our side because we're just a bunch of kids trying to do something cool across the street. Why are we're not anti-TED. We have no bones against TED. We're celebrating.
And you weren't even making a big stink about it. You were trying to.
We weren't making any money.
Yeah.
Anybody could come for free. We don't have this.
You're not even monetizing it.
No,
yeah.
we weren't even an organization at the time. So we pulled it off, and we got a lot of the TED speakers to come over to BIL because they wanted to see what the kids were doing across the street, and they gave their same talks to the unwashed masses, and it was a really, really cool event. And the next year,
so a lot of the TED speakers, what were they bound to by TED?
So they could give their talk. They need to if you're invited to, if you're given the privilege to talk at TED, your presentation or speech needs to be debuted at TED. You can't use one you've already used before. It needs to be new information, which that makes sense.
Yeah.
TED can command that, but it doesn't say anything in the contract about how soon after you can give it. Like the second time.
Did they ever change that?
Maybe.
I imagine they did.
I've been far away from TED for a while.
Because you would want to allow that person to go out and keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and if you're Bill Gates, you're going to do what the hell you want anyway. Clearly.
Yeah. So people would go to TED, give their talk, and some of them said, "Yeah, I'll go across the street and talk."
And we invited them over. Yeah, and they'd come over with these giant badges and their suits and their their handlers with them and everything.
And were some of them listening to talks at BIL?
Yeah, they were a few of them. I mean, I wouldn't say like a lot of them, but a few of them were really interested in what we were doing. They kind of saw the innovation and the sort of community
collaboration.
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, it was a really cool time. On the wiki article, it said on our website, the wiki. It basically said if you're worried about food because we aren't getting this thing catered, maybe you might want to bring a sack lunch or bring two for somebody else who didn't think about it.
Bring your own chair, bring your own food.
Yeah, or bring two maybe for somebody else. Like there's a communal thing here. So people from all over the world came to Monterey for the first BIL, and people brought extra Wi-Fi, they brought extra gear, they brought tents,
wow.
they just contribute. And somebody showed up with a cake, somebody showed up with. Hey, I make beef jerky in my garage. I brought a bunch of bags for everybody to it was a really communal.
And to give the talks, how could somebody give it? Could anybody give a talk at BIL?
Technically, yeah. And what happens is there's sort of a natural filter when you don't promise people things. Certain people go, ooh, I like that. I like the messiness. I like this. I'm not guaranteed. There's no ticket. And so this, like, if somebody was like, well, I need to know who's speaking before I show up, maybe you should stay home. Right, and so this is more of a celebration of ideas, and so what you do at an unconference, we had these giant. If you go to Home Depot, you can get these shower boards. It's like literally the cheap. It's 1/8 inch sheets of. It looks like a whiteboard basically. They're real cheap, and you can just throw them away at the end. And we had 3 or 4 different stages, and then we put the times. First come, first serve. If you want to talk about whatever you're working on, write it on the board. And what happens is you're not putting one person in charge of scheduling. If you've ever done scheduling for 300 academics, and everybody has, my plane leaves at 3, and I need to talk at 2, and I don't want to talk next to that. First come, first serve. And if you're talking about math on, say, room 2 at 3:30, well, maybe the next guy that's talking about math won't want to do it at the same time, but maybe right after yours so you get this natural emergence of not only topics, but like clumped together. So like there's a bunch of math topics happening at the end of this, a bunch of computer science over here, or biology in this room, and it organically happens, and no one's in charge of it, and it works really well.
Were there any venue costs?
Yeah, we rented like a YMCA, like a gym,
and who pays for that?
We passed the hat. We had a guy walking around. We had a total, because like as the event happens, you're incurring extra expenses. Like, hey, we have nothing but water. We need to get some like Cokes. Who wants to run to Costco and go grab a truck full of Cokes? Okay, well, how much was it? They run off, they'll put on their credit card, come back and say, okay, guys, here's the receipt. It was like, $200.
Are you informing the attendees?
Yeah, we'd write it up. We're $200 in the hole, and people would just put $10 in.
Wow, that's amazing.
And cash, and we would just raise it that way. And at the end, we actually had extra money, which just meant more booze that night.
That's amazing. Okay, so BIL and TED, and now BIL, to this day, we're in 2023, there are still these BIL things going on?
Yeah, mainly internationally. 2000, whenever I think 2010, 2011, the Arab Spring, they really picked up on it in Tunisia. The Tunisia group is extremely. We've done it in Europe, in India. Really, the Arab countries in Africa were the ones that really picked it up.
Wow.
And they would self-organize. It was a bunch of kids that didn't have a whole lot going on over there. I mean, you've got sand and goats. That's a lot of times their future looks pretty bleak in those countries. And they said, wait a minute, we can do something as big as TED, and we don't need permission. They emailed us first and said, we need to apply. And I said, there's no application, man. Just do it. Just it's BIL and kind of keep it blue. Try to match the same. We don't have any brand guidelines. This is all about spreading ideas. And so get together. There was a bill done in Afghanistan with Todd Huffman with 8 kids sitting around a campfire one night. That was a bill.
That's amazing.
So we've had over 300 all around the world. There's an idea of what a bill is, but you can riff on it however you want. Now, the cool thing is after the first year of bill, that next summer, TED came out with TEDx. They responded. And I went, oh, cool, an olive branch. And so somebody, Twitter, and I was getting email, hey, TED's extending an olive branch. They're going to let you do a TEDx thing. So I went to the website, downloaded the PDF, downloading. That's a big PDF. Downloading. 80 pages to apply, to organize, to share ideas. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And so I was like, yeah, that's not ideas worth spreading. And okay. One last piece. So TED started this TEDx thing, right? Where any university or group or city could do a TEDx. Mm-hmm. It's not TED, it's TEDx. So it's like it's a sanctioned but less.
You still have a little bit of the brand / exclusivity.
Yeah, but you got to get like insurance, and you got to have a formal board.
But that's why somebody would want to do the TEDx.
And you have to assemble a board to accept people to share their ideas. You have a clearinghouse of ideas.
So a local TEDx needs a local board.
Oh, it's a whole to do it. There's a whole structure there, and I went, yeah, that's not what we're doing. BIL is not about that. And what's cool is these boards, people would apply to talk. Well, the rejects, right, the people who got rejected from speaking at a TEDx, right, like TEDx Albuquerque, they would have 30 slots and 50 people. So there would be 20 people that didn't get to speak because the board didn't think their ideas were worth it, right? You've got some clearinghouse, which is absolute BS in my opinion. So we created something called Billy, right? TEDx,
Billy.
Bill Y. What we would do is we would go across the street at different TEDx's. The rejects that were spurned from this event would go to a pub and day drink, share their ideas anyway, and shitpost on Twitter with the TEDx Albuquerque or whatever,
Yeah.
And basically we would basically toss bombs into the Twitter stream saying like.
So Cody, it's funny when I listen to you. We've gone through the blockchain. We've talked about Bitcoin in terms of a currency. We've talked about Ethereum, obviously. We've talked about NFTs, and we've talked about using the hashtag with Twitter. We've talked about the BIL and the TED, and it really dawned on me after probably listening to your story multiple times, because I've heard you talk about some of these things in various events and venues and just interesting conversations, and I realized what you're really about is decentralization. Because all these things are decentralizing. So TED, let's give them as an example. Ideas we're spreading. We've all enjoyed a lot of great TED Talks. But when you look at the process of who can give the talk, where they can give it, how they can give it, all these things, there's a centralization of power or power brokers who decide that.
Right.
When you talk about currency, there's a centralization of who's printing the money, how much they're printing, all these sorts of things. When we're talking about, and then what the blockchain does, or even what you did with hashtags, you're allowing any user to come along and create any topic using new technology to do it. So all these things, you've decentralized the power brokers and given sort of power to the people in a sense.
Yeah, and it's really self-serving a lot of times because I hate being told what to do. You can ask me nicely and I'll do whatever you need, but don't tell me. My mom and dad know this very well, and my business partners, they all, and I really don't like having limits put on me personally. And so I look for ways to I'm sure there's other people like that out there. We'll just do it anyway.
Speaking of limits, you don't like limits being put on you, including the limits of where you live.
Oh, Mexico City. Yeah.
So 3-4 years ago now, you moved to Mexico City.
Yeah.
Let me just start before we go to 4 years ago.
Yeah.
What was your travel experience like, or even did you live anywhere else in the world and throughout your life leading up to that point?
No, up until Mexico, I only lived in 2 countries, Texas and the United States.
Yeah.
And I never felt like I was really happy in the United States. Like there was something, and you don't really realize it until you experience something else. And in 2006, a buddy of mine and I drove down to a little town called Guanajuato, Mexico. It took me like 2 days. I got there, and I'm like deep in the heart of Mexico. I mean, we're talking not on the beach. We're not in Cancun at a resort. We're in a little town in the mountains.
By the way, I only heard of Guanajuato. A friend of mine recently went there.
Awesome.
And spent a couple weeks, made a YouTube video about it, and told me this is a really great place and it's so cool. And I was just telling you yesterday, have you ever heard of Guanajuato? So I didn't even know that you spent some time there.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there. I've got a second house there, a vacant, like a little 2-bedroom or a little.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm going to have to go to this Guanajuato, Mexico sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to show you around. I found it took me like 2 days, and I was like, no. I get it. I don't speak the language here, but I see the way people work. And I grew up on the King Ranch in South Texas, which was like 98% Latin, Mexican-American, Mexican, whatever.
So you've had some exposure to the Hispanic culture.
Yeah, but I'm pink. I'm not white.
Hablas
I'm pink.
español?
Right. No, very little at the time. I speak more now. I'm not fluent, but I'm much better than I was.
And get by.
Yeah. I get myself in and out of trouble. That's the important part. But I went down there, and it took me like 2 days to like really understand. And I was like, no, you don't have to explain it to me. I totally get how this culture works. People were happy to see each other. I lived in Dallas, and I lived in the same building for 5 years downtown. I didn't know any of my neighbors. No one talked. There was no community. It was everybody would scurry to their homes and lock their doors. And it was like, why don't I know my neighbor? I mean, I can hear what they're doing in their bedroom at night, like what? Like I don't even know their names. And so I missed that about South Texas. I knew all my neighbors. We didn't lock our doors. There was like this cohesion. You get to Mexico, I know all my neighbors. All my neighbors know me. They hear music and they can smell me cooking. They come knocking on the door saying, "Hey man, cut me in." And come on in, brother. And that's what I really enjoyed. And also Mexico is a land of weak institutions, which I really enjoy.
It goes to the decentralization again.
Or just the self-reliance.
Yeah.
And instead of like everything being on rules and lockdown and all those things that you have in America, you don't have that in Mexico.
So, that's interesting.
In the day-to-day life.
So when you're in King Ranch, Texas, a much more rural area?
Well, it's 825,000 acres, you tell me.
Yeah. And then you went, and did you say you lived in Dallas?
Lived in Dallas. Yeah.
So why do you think in a lot of American cities and communities that we don't get to know our neighbors? What do you have any thoughts on that?
I do, and I want to preface this with great caution because I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I really, and I'm going out on a limb here, it's a subject that I don't really feel all that comfortable talking about publicly, but I'll get into it. There's a very few number of people in society that can handle diversity. Mm. And I can respect. I'm a libertarian, little L libertarian, and I can respect other people's differences, right? And but when you get into a culture that has, and I'm just going to use some random numbers here, but 20% Christian, 20% Muslim, 20% Jewish, 20% atheist, 20% Hindu, how do you get everybody to agree? Now, I think it's arrogant to think that, oh no, we can all live together and everybody will live in harmony. Yes, some of us can, but the average person says, no, I don't agree with that, and I can't accept your ways. And I think that multiculturalism starts to break apart. And now I want to reiterate, some of us can do that, and we can have this nice, lovely, but when it goes to the voting booth, how do you get 5 different groups to vote on the same thing? It starts to, you get this divisiveness in society, and I think you see that here in America now.
So does that not exist in Mexico City?
Well, 85%'s Catholic, or 80%'s Catholic, and it's not as contentious. Everybody, or if you do have a difference, you just sort of let it slide. You don't bring it to the front because that just pisses people off, and life's too short to be unhappy. So why are you going to bring it up?
So you're more the outsider coming into the Mexican culture. Is that a little bit?
Okay, great. Yeah, I love that you brought that up because you could call me out and say, well, aren't you a pink gringo coming into Mexico? I said, yes, but I'm also willing to assimilate and go by. I don't complain about Mexican something.
So you're willing to assimilate to the broader dominant culture.
Absolutely.
And they don't have as much diversity as, say, in the United States.
Correct.
So there's not as much of a problems within their culture. They have a shared culture more than anything else. Would that be?
And they're welcoming to they're interested in outside cultures coming in, but I don't come in saying, well, I'm going to change it to be more like what I want. I'm like, no, I'm here for the ride. I'm here with you guys. I'll fall in line.
So why Mexico City? Why, out of all the places on the planet, you chose Mexico City?
A number of reasons. I really like the Latin life. I like the priorities. They prioritize happiness, parties. You know, it's a very lively culture. It's south of Texas, and my business is based in the United States, and most of my network. So time zone wise, it works really well. And Mexico City is in my opinion, is a top 5 city in the world. Yeah. Not just by population, not by some metrics that economics or whatever, but just from a cultural and rich place to live. It's up there with New York, London, Tokyo, Mexico City.
It is one of the largest cities in the world.
24 million.
Right.
Yeah, 24
Maybe
million.
Some people might even classify it as the largest or one of the top 3 or 4 largest, I think.
Yeah.
By the way, I went to Mexico City for the first time, only time, 2019, and I remember when the plane was descending.
Yeah.
And I literally videoed the whole thing, like 2 or 3 minutes of just this massive city.
Yeah.
Amazingly massive. And I've been to Beijing and Shanghai, and those are massive cities too. And that was maybe the closest I could see to those. But actually, in some ways, it may be more spread out than
it is.
Beijing.
Well, because of the earthquakes, they don't really typically build more than 3 or 4 stories tall, and most of it's concrete. I mean, make no mistake, there's not a whole lot of even distribution of wealth in that country.
Right.
And so you do kind of get rolling hills of sort of not suburbia, because it's not quite suburbia, but it's just walkable streets. You know,
I found Mexico City really amazing as well. Again, it was only there 4 or 5 days, but
the food.
It felt. First of all, the food was great. Got to give a shout out to my friend Joe Lindsley, who organized a trip for about a dozen of us back then, and you know, he got to know a lot of different chefs and a lot of little boutique restaurants, and we had such amazing food experiences there. Kind of unexpected, because you think of Mexico, you think of like Taco Bell, right? You think of like, right? I mean, I've been telling you, the average American thinks of tacos and
no, it goes
things
deep.
like that.
Those guys know how to cook, and it's there's this spirit of Mexico, and I'm not Mexican, so any Mexicans out there that are listening, you know, this is just my take, but that group of people have a thirst for life, and they don't fear death. It's this really weird. It's like when you're a chef in Mexico, it's like you give it everything. You don't be conservative, be creative. Go out there, express yourself in the art. Look at Mexican art. It's full of colors. It's vibrant. It's violent. It's in your face. It's lively, and that is the license that I think living in a very, very large city gives you.
Yeah.
For instance, you're a chef in Chicago and you open up your restaurant. People in Chicago are always looking over their shoulder at New York. What does New York think? Do you think New York gives 2 cents about what LA or it's like, no, we're New York. Mexico City has that same.
So why did you move to New York City?
It's not my place. Not my place. Not at all. I'm from South Texas, man. South Texas boys don't belong in the Northeast.
So it's interesting. So yeah, Mexico City, really amazing place. So the other thing I want to ask you, because I've had some people say to me when I bring up Mexico or Mexico City, what do you think they mention?
Is it safe?
Is it safe?
Every single time.
Is it safe? What have you found?
I had way more problems in downtown Dallas with crime, with lifestyle, with quality of life issues, ranging from drug use, not personal drug use, but public drug use, to the homeless, to the stresses of that, and I have not found that in Mexico City. Now, granted, I don't put myself in situations where I'm by myself, wearing a Rolex, standing on the corner of a bad neighborhood, right? So there's plenty of that, and there's plenty of bad people there, but it's easy to avoid if you know what you're doing.
Usually when we hear about Mexico and the United States, it's usually 2 things. It's our border, our very porous border right now, a lot of border issues.
Yeah.
A lot of migrants coming what's interesting is
Not
I
Mexicans.
think, right? It used to be Mexicans.
Yeah, and now it's actually going
and
negative.
that's partially, I think, because the economy in Mexico has improved a lot over the number of years.
The amount of jobs coming into Mexico.
It's
right
one
now
of the
is
largest
massive.
economies in the world.
Number 9.
Yeah, number 9.
Yeah,
yeah, and which is close to the United States. Is it? What are we? Are we
number
one?
1, yeah.
So that's one thing. The other thing is we hear about murders, gangs, drugs.
Yeah, that's all targeted though. If I mean, like you look at the homicide rate in Mexico, it's massive. It's super high, way higher than the United States. But that's mainly narco on narco violence. They're not.
But you don't want to be caught in the crossfire.
Sure, but they're not doing that in restaurants that I go. I mean, it's like there's like gang territory. So like there's a Tlalpan, which is where the Colombians have come in and taken over a whole chunk of Mexico City. Yeah, I don't go to that part of town. I know that. I don't go hang out there. I don't stand on ceremony and go, well, I have every right to go down there because it's a free country and I should be able. Like, no, I'm going to go down there and get shot if I do. So you stay out of those parts of town, just like you would in Chicago. You wouldn't go into South Chicago and get shot.
If you're a tourist and
no problem,
and you want to go to Mexico City, what's to say you don't end up in one of those wrong areas?
Doing a little bit of research, and I mean, what a bad part of town looks like. You know what that looks like. But like the museums, like the part of town that I live in, are great. I walk all over the place at 10, 11 p.m. at night. I've never had a single issue.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
It's
no, I agree with you. I just wanted to get your answer for the people listening and watching.
Yeah, and there's Michoacan and Sinaloa were the two most violent narco states are. Yeah, you kind of stay around, or if you go there, which
is that part of Mexico City?
No, those are different states in the country.
Yeah,
and if you go there, just kind of be a little more on alert.
You probably wouldn't want to go there.
Well, I've been there several times.
Okay,
Great beaches and great people, great food. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Cody, this is the Agents of Innovation podcast, and we've gone through so many different ways you've been innovative. But I always, I think when people meet people who are either successful or innovative or they're doing some really interesting things, I like to help people understand the journey of how people got there. So one of the questions I like to ask is, what was your first job in life?
I was actually a lifeguard at Schlitterbahn.
You were a lifeguard where?
At Schlitterbahn. It's a water park in New Braunfels, Texas. That was my very first job for like 2.5 months in the middle of summer in Texas. So 105.
How old were you?
16.
16?
Actually, my first day of work was when I got my car at 16, my license at 16. And my mom took me down to get my actual license, and I drove to work that day.
Wow.
I did that for about 2.5 months and realized I did not want to stand in the sun all day.
So Miami Beach isn't going to suit you?
No, I need mountains, man. I need 75-degree weather, which is what Mexico gives me year round. Mexico City is at like 7,000 feet.
Is it similar to the climate of Guatemala, or does it have
Yeah.
warmer times of year?
There's a little bit of like in May it gets a little warm, but then the rainy season comes and cools everything down. We bounce around from like 75 degrees to 55 year round
in Mexico City.
Yeah, it's like Southern California without all the taxes.
Well, actually, let's go back for a second there and talk about an expat, somebody who lives outside the country, in another country. And what is that like? So you talk about, do you still have your U.S. citizenship?
Sure, yeah.
And do you still pay taxes to the U.S.?
So when you live outside, there's a foreign earned income credit, I believe, up to like $112,000 a year. I would challenge you to spend $112,000 a year in Mexico City. Like you can live on.
Is the foreign earned income income earned or expenditures?
So income based on income.
So you would challenge me to make $112,000?
No. Spend that money. Like I don't eclipse that. So I would only get taxed on anything above $112,000. Everything
that
else
you spend.
Right. So everything that I earn above that goes. It's not income for me. It's parked into a company, so I don't get taxed on the income.
Okay. So that's interesting.
I'll get taxed on it eventually, but I'm staving that off for now.
Eventually, what does that mean?
Well, in the future, whenever I decide to pull money out of the company.
Oh, I see. So the money is because it's going right into the company.
Right.
Yeah.
And I only take out what I need. Yeah.
So you're living the rich dad, poor dad life.
Yeah. Just deferring it all. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Great. And so that's really interesting. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was about the first job. So you were a lifeguard at 16. How long were you a lifeguard? For 2.5 months.
2.5 months, and then I was like, I'm done with the sweating and the sunscreen and the outdoor work. I'm gonna go get a desk job. So I worked for a publishing company for like the next 2 years in high school, running a network.
So how did you get into all of this technological space?
My dad brought home a computer when I was 9 years old, and we were living on the ranch, and you can only go out and shoot rabbits and turtles so long before that becomes old hat. And so got this computer, and I realized that if I hit this button, it would come up there, and if I read the manual and I hit these buttons in this order, that would happen. And I went, oh, this is pretty cool. And I could...
And you were 9?
9 or 10 years old, yeah.
What computer did he bring home?
It was an IBM 286. It was about this big. Yeah,
wow.
It was a big old green screen.
My first experience with a computer that I can remember was in elementary school.
Yeah.
Must have been 3rd, 4th grade. I don't know.
Apple IIe.
It was like the Apple in the computer lab, and they had the little... Well, actually, we had the floppy disk.
Yeah, and you'd take it, and so you would turn the computer off, put a new one in, and then would boot up and run the application.
And it's amazing how fast technology has moved in that time in my life.
Yeah.
That, I try to explain to these kids that are 20 years old now, who grew up with a smartphone in their hand, and every year that smartphone is getting faster, more technology. We're able to do podcasts from cigar lounges. So it's really amazing. Save it in the cloud. All these sorts of things.
And this comes full circle back to Bitcoin. So you have what's called the S curve of innovation. So you have a new concept. It's really hard to time breakthroughs. Like timing, like knowing when a breakthrough is going to happen is incredibly difficult. You can know you're getting close because the things are coming together. The recipe is coming together, but you don't know when it's going to actually happen. Take, for instance, curing cancer. Like we're putting a lot of research towards it. Is it going to happen this year? Is it going to happen next year or in 10 years from now? We really don't know. We know we're getting close, but there's no indicator that's going to happen on this date. Once that happens, like the Wright brothers flying, a lot of trying, but we didn't know when exactly. Once it did, now you have like, okay, aha. You have that aha moment. And if you look at what we did with just airplanes, we'll use the with airfoils and stuff. Wright brothers flew. 20 years later, we're flying across the Atlantic. 20 years later, we break the sound barrier. 20 years later, we're on the moon.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy.
So we went, and that's like in 60 years, we went from nothing, like just a dream of flying, to being on the freaking moon. So what happens is, and for the first few years after the Wright brothers, airplanes got incrementally better, very, very little. But then they hit this point where we went, aha, okay, we know how airfoils work. We now have we've studied enough, and now we can really innovate on it. Well, since the 1970s, commercial planes have not changed that much. Look at a plane, look at an old Boeing from the 70s and one now. It's like, yeah, they've got Wi-Fi and stuff like that in them, but the plane hasn't really changed that much. The efficiencies have only been incremental. So you have that S curve. You have that time from like, say, the 1920s and 30s all the way up until the 70s where that happened. Now, same thing can be said for the internet, right? So in 1992 when I got online, JPEGs would load up like this.
Oh man!
Right? You sit there and wait.
And we'd be on the phone lines.
Right. Now we're streaming, Game of Thrones in 4K from our cars on our cell phones. Right? How far we've come. And so you look at these technologies and you see them really early and you're like, well, who wants to do that? Well, some of us say if we can do that, we can do a lot better in the future, and that's where blockchain's coming in. So we see, you find these early technologies and you go, aha, like the breakthrough already happened. Now we just need to chart it out across that S curve, and we're almost to the point where these blockchains are really going to take off, and it takes time.
It's funny when we talk about the internet, and I just mentioned the first days of the internet, hard for anybody who's 20 years old to understand.
Yeah.
But my first experience with the internet, I remember I was in middle school. I was at a friend's house, and he was like, grew up watching college football.
Sure, same.
And, the games are played on Saturday,
right.
And on Monday morning in the paper, you would get the AP Top 25. Right?
Yeah.
It would be updated in the paper. And it was Sunday, and my friend says, hey, let's go over to the computer and see what the new Top 25 rankings are.
Right.
And I looked at him, and I said, what are you talking about? Those don't come out till Monday.
They're decided on Sunday. It just takes the printers to...
Yeah, to get you the paper. And he goes, no, we can look. And I remember he had Prodigy.
Yeah.
And which doesn't even exist, right?
No. They got consumed by another conglomerate.
Yeah, so that even like predates like AOL and everything. And so he looked it up, and boom, there was the new Top 25. And I think my mind was blown at 14 years old or whatever I was. And I was like, how is this possible?
Yeah.
Right?
It solved the communications problem.
Yeah. But with that said, over the next number of 5, 6, 7 years, whatever, we were getting on the internet with this
Exactly.
And it would take forever to get on, and then
Mom would pick up the phone and
Yeah,
reconnect.
somebody in the house picks up the phone. The internet's down.
Right.
You're in your little AOL chat, whatever, and you can't continue using the internet. And we weren't really even using it for much. We were looking up sports scores, and maybe we were chatting on AOL Instant Messenger at the best, and that was kind of cool for the time. But the amount of things that are done, and I think about when you were talking, so we no longer need the phone line. But then we went to the Ethernet cord. We no longer need that for the most part. I mean, you kind of need a router somewhere in the building to connect. But I just love with the phones that you could be anywhere. And I think about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, where Mikey was, floating in the whatever the technology was being sent in space that you couldn't even see, and then boom, it was on this TV over here. And you're like, whoa, right? And so that's kind of what we're doing now all the time, and we're not really that blown away about it because we're just so comfortable with this is how it is,
right?
And if the internet goes down, we're all mad.
Yeah.
And now,
have you ever tried using your computer without internet? There's not much to do.
There's not much to do. I mean, the whole point of the computers is that they can talk to each other and connect. But you don't even need a necessarily landline anymore. Everything, you go in a coffee shop, what's your Wi-Fi? If they don't have Wi-Fi, you're like,
are you a real coffee shop?
Yeah, why am I even here?
Yeah. But now you have 4G on your phone, you can tether, or use Starlink from a boat in the middle of the Pacific.
I've done that too, right?
Geez, we're like we've connected. Like the whole thing is connected.
Yeah. So Starlink. Now we're launching satellites into space every day. I remember I was living in Orlando at the time, a few years ago, and from my balcony in my Baldwin Park neighborhood, I could see every time a rocket was going off. Sometimes I'd be sitting out there smoking cigars. And all of a sudden, I remember one time, 5 years ago, I'm sitting there with a friend on my balcony smoking a cigar. It's 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. And we see this orange glow in this. I said, what the hell is that? And I was like, oh.
That's a Falcon 9.
Look up. That's a rocket going off. And then if you start to, actually, you can go on, either SpaceX or NASA, whatever. You could go on their website, and you could, what is the purpose of today's mission? And I remember looking up one day, and it was like, oh, they're launching a Starlink satellite into space to provide internet service to the people of Bangladesh.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. Like right from Florida here in Kennedy Space Center, we're launching something that all of a sudden the people in Bangladesh are all going to have internet from that satellite.
Yeah. And Elon is now putting up, I think they're doing like 65 or 70, don't quote me on it, but about 70% of all mass being put into space is being done by SpaceX. That is the look what privatized space, once we've privatized, I mean, that's a huge market. And we're seeing, the dollar per kilo into space now is just, it's dropped so much that you can put anything up there.
By the way, you mentioned the Wright brothers. I loved you mentioned them because I'm a big fan. Everybody should be a big fan. They might have been one of the biggest game changers in the world.
Absolutely.
But a great book anybody should read is called The Wright Brothers by David McCullough. Really, one of the things I really loved about it is just how they went out there and they just iterated. They just went over and over again with new experiments. They were doing it totally off the grid on their own dime. They had a bicycle shop.
Yeah.
And they were the ones that said, people forget in the late 1800s, there was a race to fly. People were trying to figure out, people were becoming very obsessed about aeronautics and flight. But people had all sorts of ideas of how we were going to fly.
Well, Da Vinci had the spiral.
Yeah. And the Wright brothers, they were studying aeronautics. They were fortunate to have a library in their own home. Their father was like a preacher, and he just had all these books. And one of the brothers was kind of a recluse for a few years and just was devouring books like crazy. And they came to the conclusion that birds have wings, and maybe the thing that's going to take us into flight needs wings.
Wings, yeah.
And I literally sometimes think about that when I'm sitting on a plane.
Yeah.
And we take for granted, especially how many flights you and I have taken.
Yeah.
We take for granted that this massive contraption gets us into the air and goes at 500 or 600 miles per hour.
Yeah.
And we have Wi-Fi on it now. And when the Wi-Fi doesn't work, we're like, damn it, Yeah. We take a lot of things for granted, but I'm thinking, just 120 years ago, these guys were just trying to get off the ground. And I look at that wing and go, we're still got those wings. That's how we're primarily getting into the air. So really fascinating. They learned by doing, and there's, Cody, I just wrote this book here. I have to plug it again. The American Dream is a terrible thing to waste. Be sure to get it. But I outlined 10 common characteristics of entrepreneurs mostly that I've learned on this podcast, sitting down with your 125 now, I think, episode, and a couple of the common characteristics you embody, but one of the things that you've referenced here is just people who learn by doing, and
First principles.
like I tell people is, no matter whether you went to college or what kind of formal education you have, even the students that I teach at UFM that are there at a university, I say, when you graduate here, your education does not stop. It needs to continue. It needs to be continuing, whether it's reading books, whether it's reading the Wall Street Journal.
It's on you.
But a lot of things we learn in life, we learn through the process of doing. And it seems like you didn't need higher education to do all the incredible, innovative things you're doing. Maybe controversial to say this, but maybe actually higher education wouldn't have produced such an innovative person. Maybe actually because you didn't go, you had to find other ways. But I want to take the point where you were 9 years old and you started on the computer and you got into all these. Where did technology or your fascination with, being part of the blockchain, all these things? I mean, that just didn't come from anywhere. What was your kind of process of getting there?
Just natural curiosity. I think.
By the way, one of the other top 10 characteristics: be curious.
Yeah, being online in 1991, 92, any question I had could be answered immediately. I didn't have to wait to go to the library, Dewey Decimal System, find a book, go through it. I could literally just ask the question to Alta Vista back in the day, and then now Google, and you can just get this feedback loop of information. So you can connect the dots a lot quicker and a lot faster. I think curiosity was my number one drive for that. And, I've got really great parents. My mom always said that I just wanted my kids to be happy. So, my parents kind of encouraged all three of us to go out and and do what felt right. As long as it was good, don't be a drug dealer, don't steal. But, whatever drives you, whatever's kind of natural, just follow that path.
Let me ask you something though, because I think most parents want their kids to be happy, but
they define happiness.
A lot of them define happiness. So your parents gave you maybe a sense of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely, to do what, as long as it was, and if
right.
I want,
not the freedom to do stupid things or do
within reason, yeah, but
immoral, wrong things.
And if I wanted to be, if I had a passion for baking pies and I wanted to be a pie baker for the rest of my if it made me happy, my parents said, yeah, we'll get you the ingredients to make pies and follow your dreams. They didn't say we want you to be a lawyer and a doctor and you got to go to school and you got to, it wasn't that. It was let the kids do, and everybody's different. My parents realized that. So all three of us had very different parenting based on our own individual traits.
So I wrote this book with the title, The American Dream is a Terrible Thing to Waste. And the way I kind of look at it is what the American dream is really the freedom to pursue what you would like. It's kind of that third part of the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So you're no longer living in the United States. Is the American dream to you dead, or is it being lived out in a different way for you?
I don't even know how to answer that, honestly. I just follow my own path, and I'm not real concerned about the greater, everybody else.
Yeah. Okay. So, but for you, you're living your own path. You're living your dream.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've never been happier in my life. I feel like I've always been, I've been blessed in some ways to have this life, but I also chose it, and I was also afforded the ability to do that. I was in Europe for 3 months, and I'm walking around talking to people, doing just coffee shop banter and on the train or on the bus and that kind of thing. And I would see a gap in the market, right? I would see it seems like somebody should be able to roll out a product to fix that. Why haven't y'all done that? And they're like, yeah, we don't think like that. We don't really have that. Like you Americans always, blanket statement, but God, you guys just see an opportunity and you just go after it. I was like, why wouldn't you? And I didn't realize until this trip really of talking to people just how that is. I mean, any conversation you have at a cigar lounge with a random person, they're looking for an opportunity. And I think that the American dream, when I say America, I mean,
it's kind of a broader term than
I hate to be so rah around the borders and it's black and white, but there's this entrepreneurial or enterprising spirit that the West, that the Americas have more than everywhere else. But you look at Americans, we came over here and we fought off the British, and we said, no, damn it, we want our own country, and we're going to govern ourselves. And that was a huge. It's still in the water. You can't. That never goes away. And in fact, we've done a really good job of protecting that free enterprise.
Yeah.
Go out there and go get it. Take the bull by the horns and go get it. And there's that. And you're cheered. And if you fail, that's not a problem. But like look at the East. Like failure is not an option. You do not fail. And imagine living in a society where like you can't take that risk. Here it's like, no man, take all the risk you can. That's where the money's made. That's where the opportunity. That's how you progress, is by taking risk.
You got to be fearless.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I think embodies a lot of these characteristics of the entrepreneurial spirit, is the willingness to be bold and courageous, and a little bit risk averse. And I mean, obviously, you don't want to jump over a cliff or something, but
failure is an option.
Failure is an option. That's so many entrepreneurs have failed at something, maybe multiple.
Fail
things.
often, fail fast.
Yeah, and then you
eventually
learn by doing. You learn through failure, and the thing is, you learn. That's the good. When you fail, you don't want to do the same thing again, right? That would be stupid.
Right.
But you like, okay, this didn't work. How can it work? I always go back to the Thomas Edison quote. Mm-hmm. It's been quoted a lot of different ways, but generally speaking, he had over 10,000 attempts of trying to make the incandescent light bulb, and one of his, colleagues or something said to him, we've tried 6,000 times, we've tried 10,000 times. It's not going to work. And his answer was, no, we've just found 10,000 ways not to do it. Right. So we're not going to try those ways again. So we're going to try something else. And we have light, we have electricity, we have a podcast, we have the logo in the Agents of Innovation podcast is the light bulb, because it's such an innovative thing. But also the one thing I hear from you, when you're talking about the American dream, and I thought that was really interesting, your experience with some Europeans that you encountered. They don't have that light bulb of looking for opportunity in a sense. I compare that to the immigrant experience as well.
Yeah.
Because here in the United States, we see a lot of Americans see a lot of opportunities drying up. We see jobs going overseas. We see AI taking jobs. We see all these things. So it's constantly, it feels like some kind of loss is happening, even though there's so much great innovation happening. Mm-hmm. But we have tens of thousands of people every day going across that border right now. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to, you don't see a massive immigration wave to China.
Right.
You don't see a massive immigration wave to most countries in the world. But the immigrant walks into this country.
Sees opportunity
everywhere. And I go, that's the entrepreneur mind.
Yeah.
That the entrepreneurial mind is, I see opportunities where you don't.
Right.
Right.
Because they come from a place where they had zero or very, very little. And they come here and say, I don't have the skills of a Stanford PhD. I may not be educated, but man, I can start a lawn mowing business. And I mean, how many immigrant stories have you heard where they started a lawn mowing service, and now they've got an empire? And it's like, that can only be done here.
But what's also interesting is to separate those people who picked up their stuff and left versus the people that stayed in their country.
It's a natural filter.
Right. Yeah, it is. So I think we've had since, the early 1600s here in the United States, in what was the colonies, people coming for an opportunity, and that continues with new waves of immigrants every year.
So there's actually a gene. And this is documented. This is research. This is kind of old information. They found this out in around 2010, 2012. That there's a gene that is expressed in the brain for risk. So some people, when they jaywalk, that's enough risk for the day. I'm good. My heart was racing. Some people jump out of airplanes. What's the difference, right? Why do some people are really risk adverse and some people are willing to jump out of airplanes? Like and some people need more risk. Well, when the colonies were formed, the people that left Western Europe that came over here were the people who were willing to take a higher risk. They arrived in the 13 colonies, like you said. Now, it was filtered again by manifest destiny. Mm-hmm. So only the people with even higher risk were willing to trudge across the Native Americans and the risk across the Great Plains into the mountains, going to California for the gold rush, right? So the gold rush was the carrot, right? Now, whether or not the gold rush was actually there, and whether it was, it was the promise, it was the idea. And so some people said, "I'm going to," or
even the Oklahoma land run, right? Just to go out there and stake a plant in some land,
right in the middle of Native American territory, right? And so naturally, if you look at the the gene expression, and this has all been documented, you can go online and read about this. On the West Coast, you have a higher expression than you do even on the East Coast. But the American continent, has a higher than Europe, and so that gene made its way over here. And so now you look at where does most of the innovation happen in the United States? Silicon Valley. Why? It's the land rush. It was that gene that people said, yes, let's go ahead and try to innovate. And so you can actually chart this out with genetics. It's a wild.
And now we're sitting here in South Florida, where people are come from everywhere.
Right. And that's a network effect. That's a spirit of the environment.
Yeah. So this has been amazing, Cody. We've been enjoying some great cigars. You finished yours. We have been both smoking the same cigar, the Monte Cristo Espada Oscura. How was your cigar?
It's good. Black Sword was great. Yeah.
So how did you get into cigars?
I had my first cigar with a guy named Brady Creel in in College Station, Texas. He gave me one. It was a Padron 92, and it was a Rocky Patel 92. And I smoked it, and I thought, I kind of like that. And he told me, don't inhale, be careful with it. And I was like, wow, I really like that. And I would smoke one usually on vacation. And then when I went to Latin America, it's like there's a cigar culture around there, and so I started smoking one a week, and now it's like.
Is there a cigar culture down there?
In Latin America, more so. Yeah. There's definitely it's something that it's still kind of men do it more than women. It's kind of a men's club type thing where you get together with your guy friends and you. But what I like about it is it's the only thing that I've found in life that keeps me in the moment.
Well, yeah, I totally agree. I was having a conversation.
I haven't looked at my phone. I mean, we're on a podcast.
Yeah, we're on a podcast. No, I totally agree. So many times I'm in a cigar lounge with other people, actually having real conversations, meeting people, connecting with others. In order to smoke a cigar, it's probably at least about an hour conversation. Yeah. You sit down, you smoke a cigar, maybe longer.
And your dominant hand is occupied by the moment.
That's
and
true.
You're not looking at your phone.
We're not. We can't. Yeah. I mean, look. Every once in a while, you're sitting there. Maybe you want to look and check in with something, or whatever. But 90% of the time, you're not.
No.
And that's so different than normal time. You're also not just one-on-one looking at a screen like television.
Right.
Right.
Being forced.
You actually can have kind of deep conversations that doesn't exist in a lot of places anymore. But maybe we'll get back to that. I think that's why podcasts are growing as well. People like to listen in. And there's a lot of noise going on in our society. We could have some intelligent conversations. Learn about all the great innovators like yourself, or whatever other conversations that are having. So Cody, you just came back from Europe from 3 months in Europe.
Yep.
And you connected through Miami.
Yep.
The gateway to Latin America and the world really now. So it's nice to have you here in South Florida. What did you miss? I'm going to ask you two final questions. When you're going, what have you missed about not being in Mexico City? And then generally, being that you live primarily in Mexico City and now you were traveling the world, you were in Europe. What do you miss about the United States when you're not there? So those two questions.
Yeah. So jokingly, I say, when people ask me, what do you miss most about the United States? I say Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
We don't have that down there yet.
Yeah. For me, when I was in Guatemala for a year, I was like, man, Chick-fil-A and Publix subs.
Yeah. It's one of those kind of things. I miss the food in Mexico. I'm a big. I love to cook, and so getting access to what I'm used to. I did a lot of cooking in Europe, but I really miss being home, my own bed, that kind of thing, and getting back to some sort of routine. Seeing the same faces, the people that I know, that kind of. I was by myself the time, in Europe, and so it was a lot of solo time, not speaking Italian, not speaking French or Portuguese. So
it's funny. I love Guatemala. Yeah. I've also I feel like I can kind of adapt to where I'm at in a lot of places. I really loved the week I was in Colombia, the few weeks I was down in Argentina. I'll tell you what, if Argentina wasn't a 10-hour flight, I might move there.
Yeah.
And I say sometimes the same thing. Guatemala's right around the corner. It's 3 hours. And some people ask me, you love it so much, why don't you move there? And I think, well, my family is mostly in Florida. Yeah. I also come from a great place, Florida.
You also don't want to marry your mistress. Right? I thought about moving to New Orleans because I loved it so much when I was living in Dallas. I thought about moving there. I thought, if I move there, eventually I'm just going to start complaining about the traffic and oh God, another one of these damn parades that they do. I want that to be special. I want to leave it kind of untouched.
But you've been in Mexico City for quite a while. You're
4 years,
pretty established there.
Yeah, and I think a big city like that has enough variety that it never gets old. But if I was in a small, living in Antigua, I love going to Antigua, Guatemala. But if I lived there,
Kind of small.
it would get old. It would be like, okay, like I've got there's three restaurants. There's 50 people that I know, and it becomes really small. I need a big city to.
One thing I love about Guatemala, I lived in Guatemala City. It is a big city. It's not the level of Mexico City, but when I think about my day-to-day life, I don't do that many things that are variable. I mean, I guess enough. I mean, being that I lived there a year, there was enough to be kind of new.
Yeah.
3 years, 5 years, 10 years. I don't know if something like that would be that variety. But the great thing about Guatemala is it's got so many adventures around the country.
Yeah. Get out of the cities.
You go to, I can go to Antigua for the weekend. I can go to Lake Atilan if I want to take a short flight up to Tikal.
Yeah.
And there's so many more things in Guatemala I haven't done yet.
What's over that mountain? What's on the other side of that mountain?
Yeah, Samuc Champey is over that mountain for me.
Exactly.
But I've done several volcano hikes.
Yeah.
There's more volcanoes to hike.
Yeah.
So I feel like in Guatemala you never run out of adventures.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing about the United States. I mean, there's so much here.
Yeah.
People that travel abroad that haven't maybe discovered. I mean, to me, the national parks are incredible here.
I tell people, Europeans were asking, I've never been to the United States. Well, you should come. But if you come, you're going to fly into a city and then get the hell out of the city and drive, especially the western half of the United States. Fly into LA or San Francisco, hit the national parks, the real beauty of America. Someone echoed this back to me. They said, the secret to Europe is the cities. The secret to the United States is not the cities. It's the natural land. Yeah,
but it's kind of hard because when I hear somebody, they've never been to the United States, traditionally people will go to like New York, maybe LA, DC, and it's like, well, I don't want to tell you not to go to those places because they're really, if you've never been, it's really incredible.
Sure.
But like you said, I agree. Like Yosemite, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the Redwoods.
Yeah.
Or Bryce Canyon or Zion National Park.
And I haven't been to those.
Or just drive up to Montana and get lost.
Yeah.
That's where it's at.
It's great. All right. So Cody from the internet.
Yeah.
Cody Marx Bailey. Thanks for joining us here at Strike Cigar Lounge, one of our favorite places in Boca Raton, on the episode of the Agents of Innovation podcast. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.